Okay, so today we're diving deep into something that I think is super relevant to, well, pretty much anyone online these days. Website security.
Yeah, it's one of those things that maybe doesn't always grab the headlines, but it's so incredibly important.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And we've got some great material to work with today. Crawford Peterson, he's the guy behind Lightbox SEO. He's laid out this whole approach to protecting user data, and I think there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, he's definitely thought this through, not just the what you do, but the why, which I always appreciate.
Exactly. So our mission today, if you will, is to dissect those methods, figure out why they work so well, and hopefully you listening can walk away with some solid tips to boost your own online security. Peterson's basically given us a roadmap with how he explains his setup, so let's jump right in.
Sounds good to me.
So the first thing that Peterson really hammers home is the importance of regular updates. I mean, he makes it clear this is non-negotiable, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I love the analogy he uses talking about fresh coffee versus stale coffee.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's like nobody wants that stale stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same deal with your website. The software that runs it, themes, plugins, scripts, if they're outdated, well, they get vulnerable.
Makes sense. And he doesn't pull any punches when it comes to, especially for WordPress sites. He says an outdated plugin is like leaving your front door wide open for a burglar.
It's a powerful image, right? Because it is that serious. You're basically inviting trouble.
And for Peterson, it's not just something to do every now and then. It's like part of his daily routine, right? Keeping things updated. Why is that daily commitment so important, you think?
Well, because those software updates, they often include these critical security patches. Developers are constantly finding vulnerabilities. They're always discovering new ones. So they release these updates to fix those gaps, right? To close those holes. If you ignore those updates, you're basically leaving those known vulnerabilities just sitting there, wide open for someone to exploit. Like imagine there's this widely known flaw in a popular plugin, right? If you haven't updated, the bad guys, they know exactly how to attack that weakness.
Makes you think twice about hitting that remind me later button, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
So takeaway number one, folks, stay on top of those updates. Plugins, themes, the works. Now, moving on, Peterson talks about what he calls the website's ultimate bouncer, and that's Cloudflare. And it seems like he considers this a primary line of defense, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's kind of like the first point of contact. And I think the bouncer analogy is really fitting because Cloudflare sits between your website server and the rest of the internet, filtering all that traffic.
So it's doing the screening before anyone even gets close to your website.
Right. And one of the biggest things it does is protect against these things called DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service.
DDoS, yeah.
Basically, what they do is try to overwhelm your website with a ton of traffic, all coming from different sources. The goal is to basically knock your site offline. But Cloudflare, with its massive global network, it's designed to absorb and redirect all that malicious traffic before it can even reach your server.
So it's like having a really, really good bouncer who can handle even the rowdiest crowd.
Exactly.
Now, it's not just about fending off those massive attacks, though, right? Peterson mentions securing data with SSL and HSTS. Can you break down what those protocols do and why they're so important for, keeping those connections secure?
Sure. So SSL, that stands for Secure Sockets Layer. And basically, it encrypts the data that's being sent between a user's browser and your website server. Imagine scrambling a phone conversation so that if someone's listening in, they can't understand what's being said.
Right, like those spy movies.
Exactly. So SSL does the same thing for your website data, and that's super important for protecting sensitive information like login details, personal stuff, payment info, all that. Usually, you can tell if a website's using SSL because you'll see HTTPS in the URL, and there's usually a little padlock icon in the browser bar. Now, HSTS, which stands for HTTP Strict Transport Security, takes things a step further. It's like a rule that tells browsers they should always connect to your website using HTTPS, even if someone tries to access the non-secure HTTP version. So it prevents these attacks called protocol downgrade, where hackers try to force a connection over that less secure HTTP.
So it's like making sure the communication stays encrypted no matter what.
Exactly.
Now, Peterson doesn't stop there with Cloudflare. He talks about enabling advanced header security and hiding the usual login page. What's the thinking there? Is it just about making things more complex for attackers?
It is, in a way. Think of it like adding extra layers of obfuscation. So advanced header security, that's all about configuring these special HTTP headers. They basically give instructions to the browser on how to behave in a way that boosts security. For example, there's this header called Content Security Policy, and it lets you define which sources of content the browser is allowed to load. like scripts, images, fonts, all that. This helps protect against these things called cross-site scripting attacks, where hackers try to inject malicious code. Another example is the X-frame options header, and that one can prevent your site from being embedded in a malicious website. It's a technique sometimes used for clickjacking attacks.
Interesting.
And then hiding the default login page. For WordPress, it's usually something like RuppyAdmin. It doesn't make you completely invulnerable, but it does cut down on those automated brute force login MIMs. It's like making the obvious entry point a decoy and forcing attackers to work harder to find the real way in.
So Cloudflare is our robust first line of defense, dealing with a bunch of threats at the perimeter. But after that bouncer, Peterson brings in what he calls his no-nonsense friend, and that's advanced firewalls.
Yeah.
He specifically mentions the BBQ Firewall. What's the role of that extra layer?
Okay, so Cloudflare, that provides really broad protection, right? But a web application firewall, or WAF, like BBQ Firewall, it goes deeper. It looks at the actual requests that are being sent to your website. It analyzes all that HTTP traffic, looking for any signs of malicious intent. Like imagine a super thorough customs agent who's not just checking passports, but also going through everyone's luggage with a fine-tooth comb.
Looking for anything suspicious.
Exactly. So while Cloudflare might block a bunch of connections from a sketchy IP address, the BLAS is looking for specific types of attacks within traffic that might look perfectly legitimate, like attempts to inject malicious code into forms, that's called SQL injection, or exploits targeting other vulnerabilities in your website's applications.
So Cloudflare is like Border Patrol, checking for those obvious threats, those large-scale attacks. Then the advanced firewall is more like a specialized security team, examining each interaction, looking for any subtle signs of trouble.
That's a great way to put it. It's all about that layered defense. Even if somehow a malicious request gets past Cloudflare, that advanced firewall acts as another layer of scrutiny, making it much harder for an attack to actually succeed, like having a second lock on your door, a more sophisticated one.
Okay, so we've got the foundation with updates, Cloudflare is our bouncer at the gate, and then the advanced firewall is our internal security team. What's next in Peterson's security strategy?
Well, even with all these proactive measures in place, Peterson knows that things can still go wrong. Systems can be breached, you can have server failures, even accidental data loss. So he stresses the importance of having a solid backup strategy, like a safety net.
And he's serious about backups, right? He mentions keeping at least 3 backups in the past 3 weeks, and for websites with a lot of traffic, he sets up an off-site daily backup system. That's a lot of redundancy.
It is, but it's essential. Having multiple backups and storing them in different locations, both on-site and off-site, is crucial for data resilience. If your main server crashes or gets compromised, having that off-site backup means your data isn't gone forever. And keeping backups from different points in time, well, that lets you restore your site to a clean state before a problem occurred. Peterson compares it to having multiple parachutes when you're skydiving. Yeah, just in case.
So in a worst-case scenario, like a successful attack, a server meltdown, anything that takes down your website, you can basically rewind and get back up and running with minimal data loss.
That's the idea. A good backup strategy reduces downtime and the risk of losing your data permanently, which can be disastrous for any website owner. We're talking reputational damage, lost trust, even financial consequences. It's a fundamental part of responsible website management and security.
Right, so Peterson brings it all together.
Yeah.
Right, he says regular updates, Cloudflare, those advanced firewalls, and a strong backup plan, all of that creates a comprehensive security system. It's not just about securing the front door, it's about every window, every possible entry point.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that attackers are constantly probing for weaknesses. A layered approach makes it much harder for them to succeed. Addressing those vulnerabilities with updates, mitigating those broad threats at the network level with Cloudflare, scrutinizing every bit of traffic with the firewall, and then having a reliable recovery system with backups, all of that creates a much more secure online environment. It's the combination of all these layers that makes it really effective.
And he emphasizes that even with all these proactive measures, you still need a solid plan to bounce back quickly, acknowledging that no system is perfect, right? And being prepared for the unexpected.
Absolutely. It's about minimizing the impact of any security incident. Even with the best defenses, there's always a chance of an attack or a technical failure. But having a well-tested recovery plan can significantly reduce downtime and limit the damage.
So for everyone listening, the big takeaway from Crawford Peterson is this. Build those layers of security. It's not enough to just check off a couple of boxes. You need a holistic strategy where each component works together. And just as important, have a strong backup and recovery plan as your ultimate safety net. Be proactive in your defense with updates and firewalls, but also be ready to react effectively if something does go wrong.
Exactly. Peterson's insights highlight something really important. Website security isn't a one-time thing. It requires constant attention, a commitment to implementing and maintaining all those different layers of defense.
It's a lot to think about for sure. But whether you're running a personal website, a blog, or a big e-commerce platform, anything that handles sensitive data, it's something we all need to consider. And thinking about Peterson's multifaceted approach, I can't help but wonder what other security measures might be worth exploring to strengthen our defenses even further.
Yeah, good question.
Like, what about multi-factor authentication for website logins, or regular vulnerability scanning and audits? The landscape is constantly evolving, right?
It definitely is. And that's precisely why this layered and vigilant approach, like the one Peterson outlines, is so crucial. It helps us stay ahead of the curve, ahead of those potential threats.
Food for thought for all of us out there. Thanks for breaking it all down.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk security.
Until next time.
See you then.